Hey, and welcome back! Today I'm redrawing an old illustration of my characters, Presto and Sunny. You may recognize them from my webcomic, Presto and the Gang. If you haven't read it, the context of this piece is simple enough, as the title I gave this piece way back on DeviantArt in 2010 was Best Friends, Sunny and Presto, when I was 12 years old. It had a simple gradient background meant to look like a night sky or maybe even space, with sparkles and stars speckled around the characters. It wasn't and still isn't a literal indication of anything that happens in the story itself, but it was instead meant to be a flashy example of these two's relationship. They love each other, and all the time they spend together always feels grand and exciting. For the new version of this piece, I zhuzhed it up a bit and made the background slightly more involved than before. Not by much, but enough to give it a little bit more depth and contrast. A little bit less two creatures floating aimlessly in space and more lighting up our own path through the dark together. And I like that narratively relevant concept a lot. But let's be honest, the background isn't the part anyone's looking at first. It's Presto and Sunny, and just how drastically their design style has changed over the years. The technical aspects of this piece are the easiest to point out in this regard. My line work got smoother, my sense of form is more refined, the color palette's more cohesive, the posing is more readable. But that's largely a testament to the time passed between each piece. Since I've been drawing consistently for as long as I have, these kinds of improvements were bound to happen. It's the style difference that I find most fascinating, and that I take the most pride in. Presto and Sunny are both simple in design, both back when I first created them and now. I've never wanted them to be complicated. They're a red fox and a raccoon. They don't need bells and whistles to stand apart from other characters of the same species, and I always counted on them being more recognized by their art style than anything. Sure, parts of their design details did change and improve, even though they both remained simple. Presto gained his mud-splattered paw pattern and ink-dipped tail tip as early as 2011. The interior of his ears changed from tan to pink, he finally grew eyebrows, which I couldn't tell you why my younger self left out eyebrows on my animals for so long. It's probably because of Sonic the Hedgehog's non-traditional approach to eyebrows seeping its way into my psyche, but that is just a theory. As for Sunny, his mask used to look more like a literal cartoon bandit's mask, wrapping all the way around his face. His paws were the same shade of gray as the rest of his body, unlike the usual darkened color that raccoon paws have. His ears were also entirely gray, including the inside. Now, Sunny's eye markings are much smaller and separate from one another, he has darker gray paws, and the interior of his ears are pink, which real-life raccoons do not have, but I found that it was a needed breakup of monotony in his color scheme, along with his silvery eyebrows. Small differences that took years of trial and error to reach. I spent a lot of time with each iteration of these characters and tried to take the best parts of each one, while inventing new solutions for old problems. Now they feel more like themselves than ever before, and I couldn't be more proud. Those are my boys. But let's talk about the timeline of my art style some more, because I really do think it's interesting to map out my old thought processes, inspirations, and logic. While I have countless examples of animal artwork from before then, 2010 was the year when I started writing my first draft of Presto and the Gang. A much different story than the one I have today. But as I wrote the story, I also began sharing art of my characters online. Now, right away, it's clear that I loved drawing animals, but despite that fact, I didn't look at references of those animals nearly as much as I should have. Of course, not doing proper research and studies of my subject matter was obvious. Everyone I drew had a similar facial structure despite the clear differences in species. Something more akin to a cat maybe, but even then it was just really more of an anime-inspired human face with a button nose and a 3-shaped mouth to make them more animal-like. Inspiration-wise, my earliest iterations of the cast were very anime and manga inspired. I read manga more than I watched anime as a kid, and I have memories of flipping through the Pokemon Special manga to redraw panels that I thought looked particularly cool. That's surely where the big, sparkly eyes and tiny mouths and noses come from. It was cute and pretty to me, and I think that's what I prioritized. You see, most of the attention went into their faces rather than the rest of their bodies, detail-wise. But because I was mostly taking inspiration from manga-inspired human faces and flat-faced mascot-like characters like Pikachu, I excluded muzzles entirely for many years without really thinking about it. It meant that I drew noses really small too, and these combined factors really didn't resemble animal faces much at all. The same thing happened with everyone's neck. They basically didn't have one, very Sonic the Hedgehog style. I'm not sure if Sonic was actually the reason for this one, honestly. I think it would more likely be credited to chibi styles in general. Like I said, I love mascot characters, the ones with big features but otherwise tiny statures. I liked the smaller Pokemon over the big ones, and the big ones I liked also tended to have cutesy faces. There are obviously exceptions to this rule, but in terms of the ones that I drew, they were the small, cutesy, easy to remember ones. Sure, I loved Beelzemon growing up. Did I ever draw him though? Hell no, I didn't. I was too scared to. I'll draw him now with joy, but back then I wouldn't have even considered it. Instead, I'd go for my other favorites. Terriermon, Meowth, maybe the occasional Powerpuff Girl. I loved Shugokara in large part because of their guardian characters, which were just tiny chibi versions of the main characters. I also remember I drew a lot of Vanellope von Schweetz when Wreck-It Ralph first came out because she fit a similar standard. Basically, characters that are very expressive and cute who come in teeny tiny packages. That was my go-to for drawing anything on the fly. Their designs were easily memorized and they fit on the margins of papers at school. But somewhere around 2012, I tried to put a hint more of a quote-unquote Western style to my designs, mostly in that I would draw the eyes with the lines all the way around the bottom half of the lid rather than leaving it implied. Their eyes continue to get larger and taller, with similarly long irises. There's that lingering early Pokemon eye style for you. I also finally started drawing eyebrows here, though they were mostly just thin lines without much variety at first. Beyond the face, the details of the rest of the body got more attention too, though they were still quite squatty and thick. My sense of volume seemed to have improved a bit though. 2016 was where things got kinda weird for me. I started to feel like my chibi manga leaning style was hindering me. I started to admire those with more detailed art styles. Ones with smaller, more quote-unquote realistic eyes, more lumps and bumps to really show off how well the artist understood their subject's form. I started looking more and more at Western comic book artists instead of manga artists. On a personal level, I won't say much beyond 2016 was an absolute dog shit year for me and leave it at that, but the effect it had on my art was also pretty rough. I was leaving high school and preparing for college, and it felt like my art needed to be more grown up. I don't know if I was thinking in these exact terms at the time, but I do know that I was trying to change some of the core components of my characters' designs in basically the opposite direction they started in. I still loved drawing, but I feel like I wasn't actually looking at the art that I was making anymore. I wasn't seeing the problems with it that I can see in it now, and I didn't realize I was holding myself back. In the end, this era of my art is my least favorite. It lacks the same joy that both my current and earlier art had. I was experimenting with a style that I didn't personally connect to. It wasn't the way I wanted to draw, but for some reason I really felt like I had to try. I think I had subconsciously in my mind decided that drawing big, expressive anime-style eyes, expressions, and shorthands was somehow only good if others used it. Not me. I tried to put as much unnecessary detail into my drawings as I could, even though every drawing felt muddy in execution due to me over-detailing everything and not looking at the piece as a whole to see if it was working. But I am still grateful for this era of my art, because despite it all, I did learn a lot from it. Even if I don't like a lot of the art I produced, I can see the skills I picked up from it in the end. I can now focus on the details I want to highlight on each piece, rather than put every detail that doesn't need to be there. I also made a lot of major changes to my characters' designs, both in their visuals and in their stories, things that really improved them overall and got them where they are today. I needed this rough patch to sort myself out. I figured out both what I wanted and what I didn't want in my art. Instead of desperately trying to combine every single art style and technique I've ever admired into one definitive style, I can just do what I want. In the moment. Each drawing doesn't have to include every single thing I've ever visually enjoyed, because that's not possible, and it certainly isn't fun to attempt. 2020 was a time I finally allowed myself to return to form, so to speak. I brought back the anime eyes. I streamlined my shapes into something more simple and less muddy. I'm able to focus on my overall intent instead of fixating on every little detail. I've been refining everything else since then, and it's led me here. I just love drawing. I love drawing whatever I want, however I want. I think it's so fun to talk about this sort of thing too, and to see visual evidence of my brain figuring everything out over time. Hey, thanks everyone who's still sticking around to hear all this. I appreciate it, and I would love for you to share with me in the comments your own art progression if you'd like. If you've got any big breakthroughs in your journey that you think someone else might need to hear, I sure want to hear it. But alright, before we wrap this up, I want to share one more little story before I go. Okay, so when I first got the idea to redraw this piece, it wasn't the first time I've considered doing so. Back during the tail end of 2019, I sketched out a rough first pass of my first attempt at this redraw, but I never finished it, and you can see that this idea has clearly stuck around for a while. So truthfully, I started this redraw without even looking at the original piece. I don't know, I was too lazy to open up DeviantArt and rummage through my storage, and my memory of the original work was good enough that I didn't feel like I needed to. So it was only after I fully completed the final piece that I went to collect the original drawing. Only for my jaw to drop when I got a look at the date it was originally posted on. August 5th, 2010. I look at the date on my calendar. August 5th, 2024. Exactly 14 years later, and completely by accident, I redrew the exact same art piece. I swear to you, it wasn't planned that way. I am too bad at numbers and dates to remember something like that. But wow, it made me smile at how serendipitous it felt. This original piece was one of my favorites as a kid. I couldn't tell you why, I just liked it. I still do. But now it feels even more special. I don't know, not much else to say about it, but I wanted to share that with everyone. Thanks for sticking around until the end. Please remember to check out my webcomic, Presto and the Gang, if you want to see more of these characters. I update it every Monday and Thursday. Links to read it are in the description below, as well as on screen now. That's all for now, and as always, thanks for hanging out.